Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your sun in Gemini and your moon in Scorpio. And I've done a number of these combinations where one of the planets is in air and one is in water. And I think there is always a lot of confusion within the person when they have this combination because we're talking about air being intellect and water being emotion. And in this particular case, the water is in a water sign, and that means that that person has enhanced emotional self expression, or they're coming from a very emotional place. And so it's really enhanced, in other words. And because the sun, which is our aspirational self, is in an air sign, the person really identifies and wants to be that intellectual person. Air is also detached. So air really does not want to delve into emotions in the actual sense of feeling them. I'm not saying that people who are air signs are not fascinated by emotions. They can be. They actually can be very good at talking about emotions. So this combination would be great for a psychologist because the person has that analytical ability. But I think it almost would work better in a sense if the sun was in Scorpio and the moon in in Gemini, because there is such a tendency when the moon is in Scorpio to have that very, very complicated emotional nature. I've said before that I think that the moon in Scorpio is probably the most difficult moon to have, but I don't like saying things like that because then people feel like, oh God, I have this, horrible placement. And I don't mean it like that. I'm just talking about the function of the moon. Because when we're talking about emotions, we're talking about our reactions to life. And I have a conjunction between the moon and Pluto. And even though my moon sign is Virgo, because my moon sign is in Virgo, I never understood why I felt so emotional. And now I get it. And I realize that it's almost like having the moon in Scorpio. And I realize how complicated it can get because emotions for everyone are things that we react to, but sometimes we don't understand why certain things make us react so strongly. And by the way, reactions don't mean that you're actually doing something or that you're, telling the other person how you feel. It may be all internalized. So in this particular case, a person who has this combination has to be very willing to go into their shadow, because the sign of Scorpio and the eighth house that Scorpio represents or rules is the house of the shadow. And the shadow is the part of ourselves that we reject, refuse to acknowledge, are afraid of, that have been traumatized by, the things that we've been traumatized by. And it can make it very difficult to kind of purge that if a person is actively working against it. For instance, if somebody's sun is in Scorpio, they're naturally, and regardless of the moon sign, they're naturally going to welcome any chance to face difficult things square in the eye simply because that is how they are wired, because of that purging effect. But when it's the moon sign, it becomes more difficult because the moon is also very subjective. So the way people experience things, and of course, our emotions are connected to memories, right? Things that have happened. We don't get emotional in a very personal way, I should say, by things that have not happened to us. And when we make things all about ourselves, it's like we lose ourselves in certain experiences. In other words, the more that we can take what has happened to us personally and objectify it and make it something more universal, or when you spiritualize it, meaning that you see it in a bigger picture, then it's not something that we take as personally. I'm not talking about spiritual bypassing where we just try to make it like it's not that big of a deal, it's God's will. I'm talking about seeing it from a higher perspective. And this is something that it becomes when you have the moon in Scorpio, it can be very easy to drown in your own experiences, and therefore reactions to them are pretty much uncontrolled. The person is just in that experience. So in that sense, it also look to the moon, to the Mercury sign, because if your sun sign is Gemini, there's a good chance your Mercury sign is also Gemini, because Mercury is very close to the sun. And if it's in Cancer, then you really have to get your emotions in check, because you will feel that sense of emotional overload. But it doesn't mean that you can't make anything good out of this. The key is to learn how not to intellectualize everything. Because another thing that I do feel is that there might be the case that people who have prominent water experience more than usual traumatic events as children. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but it seems like when I've done readings, personal readings for people, that when people tell me their stories, the dramatic events that happen to them when they're younger, and a lot of times this will involve death of somebody very close to them, and maybe this is part of the way it's set up, where the certain chart that you have is meant to elicit certain emotions. And that would be the way, if you have water, a lot of water in your chart, that if you lose somebody close to you, that would have some kind of emotional effect that would trigger your emotions to a higher degree than somebody who has a lot of air. In this particular case, because you do have the sun and air, there is some kind of cosmic challenge for you to get more detached in your life, but at the same time, you're not losing your humanity. You're not just completely being like the King of Swords and having, well, I'm not saying that that's a bad card in the tarot, but that very, very aloof, remote type of feeling towards others. So because the emotions are so deeply roiling inside of yourself, this combination has the danger of passive aggression that feels more aggressive than passive, because I was thinking about Roseanne Barr, who has the opposite combination. And because she has her sun in Scorpio and her moon I was going to say Sagittarius, in Gemini, she has that more lighthearted ability to kind of make light of some of the pathos that happen in life. And this combination is different because the person is really feeling these things. But because you might even have Mercury in Gemini, and that has a tendency towards snark, the person may not want to really go there emotionally with other people. And so they use sarcasm as a way to convey their dark, feelings towards others. And so look at that. Look at if you have a tendency to make snide remarks, and then when the other person takes offense, say, God, can't you take a joke? I was only joking. Don't you have a sense of humor? And kind of gaslighting them that way, because this could be a real combination for gaslighting, which is, really getting inside people's heads and manipulating them by convincing them that they're crazy about what they're thinking as it pertains to you. And so, again, the shadow that needs healing. And this is why people gaslight, because they have this shadow that they can't even wrap their brains around, and they really want desperately to. But there's no question that this combination could be great for anything that pertains to psychological insight. When I mentioned about being a psychologist or some sort of therapist, the only drawback is that because the moon is in Scorpio, the person is going to be highly empathic, and it could be very stressful for somebody like that to listen to people's problems all day. If it was the reversed, it would be a lot easier because the moon would be in an air sign and would be more detached. But even being somebody who is a diagnostic specialist would really excel in that. Maybe they don't have to actually deal with people's problems, but they can analyze what the specific type of help the person needs. In other types of professions, I would say a writer. This would be like a great placement for a writer, because the person has loads of emotion, but they also have this innate ability to communicate effectively. And that's a really great thing, because some writers are very cerebral, and there are people who really like that type of art. I think about that in music. Like, if you think about somebody, the first person that popped into my head, who's actually not an air sign, is David Byrne. I was thinking of the Talking Heads. He's actually a Taurus, but he probably has like his moon in air or something, and Taurus is an earth sign, so it's very detached as well, dry. That type of music is appealing to some people, even though there's this kind of cerebral quality to it. But the deep emotions that really move people, I can see this combination as being able to pinpoint and provide, precision in whatever the person is writing, but still elicit emotions. In terms of love, I think this can be super complicated as well. Look to your Venus sign to gain more information, because Venus is a personal planet. It could be very close to the sun. It is very close to the sun, but it could be in the same sign as the sun, meant to say. And so Venus in Gemini is very flirtatious. It's going to make the person very, almost like maybe even a little bit fickle in love, in love with one person one day and another the next. However, because of the moon being in Scorpio, I highly doubt that would happen. I think that more likely the desire to flirt could also be something that is done for another reason, maybe some kind of emotionally calculating reason. Like if the person's trying to test their partner in some way, because there's always this testing quality with Scorpio, because there are trust issues with somebody who is Scorpio, in whether it's a sun, a lot of the personal points, and so that could be like playing games with someone that they are involved with. And another thing too is it could be that blowing hot and cold, where the air signs want freedom. They do not want to be totally tied to another person. Even Libra, that is associated with being in a couple, yes, they're the most likely to welcome partnership overtly, but even they do not want to be possessed at that deep level. Well, with this combination, there's kind of this back and forth type of wanting it and not wanting it. And some of the other personal points will kind of sway it one way or another. If you have a lot of Cancer in your personal points, if, let's say you have Venus in Cancer or Mars in Cancer, you may be more inclined to be more attached to a person emotionally. But even in those cases, there will still be this part of yourself that is a little bit ambivalent. And that's really the nature of Gemini, is to have this contradictory part of themselves, a dual self. And so that's just something that you would have to live with regardless of what your moon sign is. So anyway, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.